So, President Trump delivered his second State of the Union speech earlier this evening, and I'd have to say the president did a good job. He typically does rise to the occasion on such speeches. I know, given the government shutdown and Nancy Pelosi canceling the first scheduled State of the Union address, it was most definitely a disappointment, I believe, for the president, and he held off and wanted to make sure that he delivered the State of the Union address in the House chamber. And you can't blame the man. It is a beautiful setting. It is in all of its grandeur. The president definitely looks for that type of occasion, that type of setting. He is a salesman. He likes the backdrop of the American flag, members of both houses of Congress there, along with the distinguished guests that he has in the galley with him. So overall, the president did a good job. He definitely stuck to the message of unity, and he did so in a very careful and I think orchestrated way, doing so not just with policies and the things that he has so far accomplished with his 2 years in office, but also by incorporating generations of Americans who have brought us to where we are today from a positive perspective. When he spoke about the men who served in World War II, Buzz Aldrin, who stepped on the moon, and at the end, he tied it all together with, despite all of the great things that America has accomplished in the past, her great days, if we decide, are very much ahead of us. And I personally believe that. With the technological advancements that we have, with what should be a more civilized society and a more civilized world should mean more peace, less war, less conflict. The medical breakthroughs that we have witnessed, and we've only scratched the surface of those breakthroughs of what's come. I pray that it's cures for all types of cancers, Alzheimer's, you name it, let's do it. The other day, I touched on the topics that I thought the president would discuss. He covered all of them. What he did, however, go into mention that I didn't bring up yesterday was in regards to healthcare, prescription drugs, and medical advancement. One of the things that the president touched upon um, was furthering the research in regards to HIV/AIDS, and I believe the president was proposing a $500 million investment over the course of the next 10 years to completely eradicating that devastating disease that's been with us for now going on, I believe, 40 years, early 1980s. So God willing, great men and women in our scientific community will create a cure for that and rid the world of one more disease. Now, moving on with some of the other topics, the president most definitely discussed immigration policy, went into greater detail on that. I would have to say on the topics that the president discussed, uh, he definitely gave more weight to the economy and to immigration. He again stated his case, I think, rather eloquently on the need for a wall on the southern border. He didn't go into so much the financial details of everything, but in that type of setting, I wouldn't expect him to, but more or less talk about the story as to why it is needed. I think he made a compelling argument. It had always been something that I have agreed with. It has been something that fellow Democrats have agreed with, whether that was Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer of New York, President Obama, Vice President Joe Biden. The list goes on and on. The reason why we are hitting a wall and not building a wall is because President Trump is in office. Plain and simple, it's politics. It's not needed. We do have a crisis. The fact that people are coming into our country illegally, we cannot stand for this. Why? Because we are a nation of laws, and you either are a nation of laws or you are not. The president has made this point time and time again, and I am so happy that he said it this evening when he said, I want more immigrants to come into this country more than ever before in this country's history. But he wants them to do it how? He wants them to do it legally. Now, how anybody can disagree with this is beyond me. Screws loose, which, look at some of these people in Congress, they got a lot of screws loose, okay? Where do we move from here? February 15th is the deadline, or we may enter another government shutdown. Now, given the sausage-making process of our government, it's really more realistic that a deal has to be struck probably by the end of this week or very early next week in order for the House and the Senate to put actual legislation to the floor, to have their subsequent votes, and then for the president to sign it into law should they come to some sort of compromise, some sort of agreement. I hope they do, because it's commonsensical and it can be done. I saw in some of the after speech analysis, there was a snap poll, I believe it was from CBS, and their viewers agreed with the president on immigration. I think it was a 76% approval of what the president said. And that's because the vast majority of this country runs off of common sense. It may not seem like it, but when they hear a commonsensical idea, they know it. And that's why this country has been successful and has persisted for 200 years. Once we lose common sense, we're gone. End of story. They heard common sense solutions tonight. That's why they vastly support the president, according to that CBS poll. Of course, that was something quick right after the fact. We'll see what happens in other subsequent polls over the next couple of days, but I imagine they're going to come in line with those types of numbers. Again, because it's common sense. We're a nation of laws. Our government has the duty and obligation, first and foremost, to defend our liberties, to defend our freedoms, and to defend our borders. We can get in these other conversations as far as entitlement programs and where government spending goes and foreign policy and this, that, and the other, and that's fine, and this program's all about that. But at the heart, there can be no disagreement that the role of government is to enforce the law and enact laws. We have laws on the books. Let's enforce them. The demographic problems that we have in this country that will lead to further economic problems, in part, can be solved or at least mitigated from further progress in immigration, meaning we have more people in this country. Believe me, when you look at the demographics of other developed countries or developing countries, such as Japan, China, Germany, the UK, Southern Europe, the Mediterranean countries, their demographics are terrible. Some of them are horrendous. There are not enough births, or there is not enough immigration to take care of the older generations. That is a large part of what we are witnessing with this global economic slowdown. This is part of a major demographic shift of baby boomers the world over slowing down and changing patterns that we've all become used to. Now we'll see how it plays out. In my estimation, my forecast, it will not be smooth sailing. That doesn't mean it's going to be a catastrophe by any stretch of the imagination. It's probably not going to be smooth sailing just because people don't like change. There's going to be change coming. There's a lot of debt in the system that needs to be liquidated, deleveraged. That's a process that doesn't happen overnight. So those things are going to cause a lot of ups and downs over the next probably decade or two. But time will tell, and we'll see what happens with that. Now, the president went into further detail, and on this point, I'm glad he did, to educate the American people this evening who may not have been paying attention to earlier addresses to the nation on the issue of human trafficking and sex trafficking. That is a very human response that people can relate to. They can be sympathetic to that. They can be empathetic to that. Could you imagine yourself being one of those young girls or young ladies being smuggled into this country hundreds or thousands of miles away from their homes simply to be sold into prostitution or God knows what? Could you imagine your children or your neighbor's children being put in that situation? That's why these are common sense solutions. This has nothing to do with the right or the left, but this has everything to do with right versus wrong. And I was happy that the president mentioned that. I was a little disappointed that there wasn't the type of response from the Democrats to stand in unity and applaud as the Republicans did on those points. The one thing I will have to say in regards to this with the president, I was a little disappointed because he was making so many good points, one after the other, on the drug crisis, the opioid crisis, the heroin, the cocaine, the fentanyl, everything that comes over, most of it across from the southern border, the human trafficking, the sex trafficking, and the president is very good at painting pictures and telling stories. I was really hoping for a greater call to action as soon as he was finished making those points. I wish he had said, enough is enough. The United States of America cannot and will never stand for this type of action against anybody, and it's definitely not going to be coming into this country. It would have been a call to action. I think you would have had both parties rather, on their feet applauding that, because I don't know how you could not. So I think that may have been a missed opportunity there, but I don't want to take away from the overall presentation because it was good in my opinion. Now, moving on to the economy, the president again really likes to talk himself up in his achievements in regards to the economy. I'll say this, I'm not in the camp that the United States economy is strong. However, I do believe that the president is building or has helped creating a stronger foundation for a more successful and vibrant economy as we move forward. What do I mean by this? Well, the tax cuts. Now, while I actually think the tax cuts were not necessarily needed at the time because of our budget deficits and our debt, there's no questions that they have helped corporations and they are going to help middle-class Americans. I'm always for tax cuts, but there's sometimes a time whether it's the best time or not. So we can argue that back and forth. Probably not the greatest time to do it because the amount of growth that needs to be generated in order to start combating these levels of deficits and debt that we are continuously building isn't going to be derived from that type of tax cut. But in principle, I can agree with it. The deregulation, fantastic. You've probably seen some of his ceremonies where he has all of those regulations piled up, stacks and stacks of paper as tall as him, and he just says, we're done with it. They're gone. Fantastic. And I'm sure the president and his administration will continue to bring deregulation to many parts of the economy. How much redundancy is there between one piece of legislation and another? God only knows, but I have no doubt they were part of those stacks and stacks of paper that stood as tall, if not taller, than the president himself. So I applaud the president and his administration for that. One of the other things that I'm happy that the president mentioned, because I don't think a lot of people realize how big of an energy producer the United States has been and currently is. As the president said, we are the largest producer of oil and natural gas in the world. I'm sure that surprised a lot of people. Now, of course, if you had read our book, The Cynic's Guide to Investing, you would have been aware of this, but you can always find a copy of that on Amazon.com, and I hope you do. Energy is obviously a very important aspect of any economy. Energy is needed in every input, every output. There is some type of energy being used. Not only does it have huge economic implications, but it also has national security implications, especially because we don't exist in a global economy that runs completely on solar power, wind power, geothermal energy, or any other type of renewable resource. So the fact that the United States is such a producer and is now a net exporter of energy is going to be another boon for the U.S. economy for many, many years to come. Now, because natural gas is taking up such a significant amount of the energy that is consumed in the United States and abroad, and the fact that it is a cleaner energy in regards to coal, we'll probably start to see more coal plants closing. I know that may not be something that a lot of people in states such as West Virginia or Kentucky or Colorado may want to hear, but we'll see if at least the Trump administration continues to have the miners mine that coal and it be exported to other countries who still heavily rely on that use of energy. But nevertheless, when one industry goes away, another one takes its place. And hopefully those communities who are more highly dependent on the coal industry can start to transition to another source of energy, and hopefully the natural gas market may be a solution for those individuals and families. Now, another part of the President's State of the Union that I'd like to discuss is the fact that he brought up the abortion issue that has been causing a lot of debate and a lot of discussions, I'm sure, around the country in regards to the newly passed law in the state of New York and the discussion of a very similar law in Virginia. You could tell in the president's voice, his mannerisms, and in his face that he took it personally. The man is a father and grandfather. And the fact that people in at least the state of New York and a number of people in the state of Virginia, and I'm sure in many other states, for them to think that it is okay to terminate a pregnancy while the mother is about to give birth is disgusting. Where is the moral clarity? Where is the moral compass of this country? I think the president spoke beautifully and powerfully on that point. that such actions are really un-American and have no place in this country. And he called on Congress to enact legislation that forbids late-term abortion. Now, from a constitutional standpoint, I don't believe this belongs at the federal level. I do believe it belongs at the state level. I just never thought we would have such a law be passed in a state. If people don't like the law in New York and it's something they feel very strongly about, then you can vote with your feet and you can go move to New Jersey, Connecticut, California, Pennsylvania, wherever you want to go. I hope the state legislature of New York changes course. I was appalled that upon the passing of that legislation, that the Freedom Tower in New York, its antenna was lit pink. I don't think that's anything to celebrate. If it was Breast Cancer Awareness Month, by all means. If there was a cure for breast cancer, light it up. But to light up that tower in pink because a law was passed that allowed a mother to kill her child that is in the process of being born is nothing to celebrate. Now, if there are circumstances that truly cause some sort of medical emergency, I get it. But that's the exception, not the rule. So I hope that we as Americans can elevate ourselves, condemn such laws, and that other states take notice that that's not to be tolerated, that's not to be enacted, that's not to be implemented. It shouldn't even be thought of. Now, moving on to the Democratic response from Stacey Abrams of Georgia, who was the gubernatorial candidate. It's very hard, I think, for individuals to follow the President of the United States in that setting. But I think Miss Abrams did a very good job. I think she told personal stories that people could relate to. It wasn't as optimistic as the president, but I wouldn't expect it to be. But she was relatable. She carried herself very well. Those speeches can be tough. If you recall, just a handful of years ago, Senator Marco Rubio gave the response to President Obama's State of the Union address, and you could visibly tell that he was sweating and needed to reach for a glass of water to take a sip. That type of stage can be obviously intimidating, and you're following the President of the United States. Not an easy act to follow by any means. Of course, if the President needs a drink during one of the many, many applause lines, he can reach over, take a sip of water, and nobody knows the difference. But Miss Abrams did a good job. I commend her for that. I hope some of her message, as I hope some of the president's message, can hold true, and that there can be compromise, that the president and this divided Congress can succeed in doing what they're supposed to do. And that is working and serving the American people and solving the issues. Now, lastly, while we have discussed here today many of the things that the president discussed, One of the things that he did not mention, and I'm not surprised that he did not mention this, is our issues with the national debt, our deficits, our expenditures on Medicare and Medicaid, Social Security. What are the solutions? Are these things even being identified as problems? If they are not soon identified as problems and tackled by the president and this Congress, it is a dereliction of duty. Now, this wouldn't be the first president, nor would this be the first Congress who I would consider guilty of dereliction of duty and not paying attention to this problem and not doing anything about it. But I tip my hat to this president because he did campaign on a lot of issues, and he has been successful in tackling a lot of those issues, which is one of the first things that he got into right away from his speech, talking about all of the achievements he has so far achieved in his 2 years in office. And I applaud him for that. I very much do. But when you're staring at $22 trillion in your face, and then you want to applaud yourself and your administration for having a strong economy, and we have near $1 trillion deficits, something's not jiving. So we need to tackle this issue. We need to tackle it straight on, because the bigger it gets, the bigger a problem it becomes, the harder it becomes to tackle. And the solution, if our government can come up with one, that process will be painful because of the debt deleveraging. But if our government does not come up with a solution, then the markets will. And the market will take no prisoners. So I hope in the days and weeks and months ahead that in addition to all of the issues that the president spoke about this evening, that we can start to bring our men and women home from many combat theaters around the world, that some sort of trade deal between the United States and the Chinese can be made for the better of both nations, that the USMCA, which will replace NAFTA, can get passed. How much different it is from NAFTA, to be honest, I don't know, but if there have been some improvements and there has been acknowledgement from both sides of the aisle that there are some, let's get that passed. Let's continue peaceful and open negotiations with the North Koreans. And let's continue to make this country great. I want to thank you all for joining me today, and I hope to have you back next time. This is the Capitol News. I am Alex Koritis. Godspeed.